Hello everyone and welcome to another News Coolum video and another plug side chat. Bjorn Nealand finally got his hands on a Kia Niro EV, which is sort of the one I think people have been waiting to see. He had reviewed the Kona EV before. I think I got a little bit of flack for saying that I wasn't really impressed that much with the Kona EV because I feel like given the amount of time since the Bolt EV has been released, I felt like the Kona EV should have been better, maybe, than it was. I think a lot of its strengths have to do with its software. Design is more of an aesthetic thing that you might or might not agree with, but I wasn't actually that impressed with the Kona EV. But the biggest reason for it had to do with the hardware and the construction. So it's a very heavy vehicle. It's very small, so even though it has the same footprint as the Bolt EV, it has significantly less cargo room and a rear passenger room. And I didn't like the way they had designed the front of the passenger area because I feel like it's very cramped. They have the column coming down the center, so it's not like there's an open pass through. And those are the kinds of things that I disliked about the Kona EV. And knowing that the Niro EV was going to be very similar, I kind of wanted to see exactly what it turned out to be. Well, I actually think after seeing it now, that was more of what I was hoping the Kona would be. I think the Niro EV actually has most of the strengths of both the Bolt EV and the Kona EV and a limited number of the weaknesses, right? So now, without anything exhaustive or like truly comparative, it looks like the Niro EV's efficiency is very similar to what I at least see in the Bolt EV, or I guess a little bit less than what Bjorn was seeing in the Kona EV. So the efficiency, maybe it's down a little bit. And then the other big issue that I have with the Niro EV looks like it's also present in the Kona EV, and that's the battery appears to protrude out below the structure of the vehicle chassis. That is an issue, and I don't know how much of an issue it will be in the future. I think it really depends on how people end up using the vehicle. But outside of those issues, and maybe weight, we haven't confirmed that yet, but the Kia Niro might actually be even heavier than the Kona. So those are just a few of the weaknesses that I saw, but otherwise, it has, like I said, I feel like the strengths that came with Kona EV's software package. To be fair to the Bolt EV, it looks like GM also for the 2019 model added the ability to control your battery percentage state of charge in 5% increments from 40% up to 100%. So in that regard, at least some of the software on the Bolt EV is also being updated to sort of match what we're seeing in the Kona and now the Niro. It seems like the Niro and the Kona both actually have something that I wish the Bolt EV would still have, which is the battery conditioning that you can control actively as a user, right? Like turning on the battery heater or turning on the battery cooler in anticipation of doing some sort of a DC fast charging session. But otherwise, the big strength of the Kia Niro now is the size, the size capacity. So it actually looks like it might have even more space than the Bolt EV, both in terms of rear cargo and in terms of rear passenger room. The charge rate for the Kia Niro in some ways actually seems better than the Kona in the terms of the way it steps down is actually a little bit later, so you preserve a higher charging rate for a little bit longer into the charge session. All of these are small differences that I don't think are really going to amount to much. The charge rate for both the Kona and the Niro give them distinct advantages over the Bolt EV, as long as or when public charging actually gets built out to support it. Overall, I think if you had to line up the Bolt EV, the Kona EV, and the Niro EV, I really do think that the Niro is probably the superior of all three. And the only, I guess, caveat to that is what the pricing ends up being. At the same price, I think it's a no-brainer. It's the better of the three. In terms of pricing, though, I think it creates a really competitive market now between the Kona, the Bolt EV, and the Niro. Now, there aren't probably going to be a whole lot of markets where they're competing with each other or where all three are going to be available at the same time or in decent numbers. We still need to wait and see how available both the Kona and the Niro are going to be in the US market. Right now, it seems like Korea is going to be one of the few places that's going to have all three vehicles readily available to consumers at the same time. But I think it gives three very valid choices depending on what your priorities are and what your interests are. With the Kona, like I said, my big concern with it was the upgrades that I see that it needs in order to be more competitive are almost all hardware based, which is more difficult to address. Like I said, that I think that Niro is sort of on top at this point, but it does actually have some similar issues as well that I think it's primarily hardware based that it's going to need to address. The Bolt EV's issues are primarily software, though a recent discussion with a GM engineer indicated that the Bolt EV's charging rate was actually due specifically to hardware. If some of the sleuthing that's been done is accurate, it's primarily due to the individual cells that GM chose to use for the Bolt EV. So in that regard, the Bolt EV also has some hardware hurdles that it needs to get over in order to be more competitive. But I feel like that's really it, because the battery is such a self-contained package that's a more easy thing to upgrade and improve. Whereas, like I said, with the Kona EV and with the Niro, if appearances are correct, then I really do think they need to do something with that battery construction and then possibly redesigning the chassis so that they're lighter and, again, the battery doesn't protrude out of the bottom. Probably going to be less of an issue with the 40 kilowatt hour versions, but from the sounds of it, we're not actually going to see that in the United States anyway. But overall, I think the Niro is the big hit. I don't know how it's going to stack up to something like the Nissan Leaf when that is finally unveiled with a thermally managed 60 kilowatt hour battery pack. But for now, I think it's one of the more valid choices when it becomes available. If Bjorn's estimates are right, and I see them as being probably pretty accurate based on the reports I've seen about pricing, you can expect the Kia Niro to be about 5% more than the Kona. And as it is, the Kona sort of bookends the Bolt EV. In the US market, what that's going to mean, though, is neither the Kona nor the Niro are going to be as cheap as the Bolt EV is on the bottom end, and the Niro on the top end will be slightly more expensive than the maxed out Bolt EV and will be slightly more than the Kona. Now, with that, again, specific to the US domestic market, GM is right on the verge of triggering the phase out of that federal tax credit. In 4 to 6 months, it's possible that the Kona and the Niro are both operating with an additional $4,000 bonus, basically, because they'll still be enjoying the full $7,500 tax credit, while the Bolt EV will only be enjoying the $3,750 credit. Anyway, I'm interested to hear what you think about the new Kia Niro, how it stacks up to the Kona and the Bolt EV and maybe the upcoming Nissan Leaf. I think they're all valid choices at this point. They're very close, but giving consumers options that now you can get a lot closer to what you're specifically looking for, I think is a good thing. I'm really hoping to see these vehicles produced in number and delivered to places like the United States as well. If you enjoyed this video, please like and subscribe. It really helps out the channel, and thank you for watching.